go. We're now official, right? Hi, everybody. My name's Alan East. I work with the Desperado LGBTQ plus film festival here in Phoenix, Arizona. Our festival is January 24th, 25th, and 26th of 2025. I can't believe we've been going for 16 years. It's exciting. It's great. And we're happy to have Michael Mabbott. Am I saying that correctly?
Yep.
Okay, he's the co-director and co-writer for Any Other Way, the Jackie Chan story, and we're excited to talk to him about it. And Britt Ruert is here from Paradise Valley Community College. He is our film professor and he teaches some really cool classes. So Britt is moderating, and so go ahead.
All right. First of all, really loved your film. I am excited for everybody else to see it because I was just so impressed by it. I see many documentaries each year, and I see many movies each year, and this was one of the best documentaries I've seen all year.
Thank
So I really want to praise you on that because it was very well told. It was a story I didn't know, and I always like learning new things. So, yeah, we will talk about that in the back half of the interview. I want to get started. Let's talk a little about your early career. Like, how'd you get started? What brought you to the film business? What are some of your early projects that you really enjoyed working on?
Well, I've always loved music, and my first film, in retrospect, I wonder if my first film was just me wanting to work with a bunch of musicians and be in a music studio and make an album, which is what ended up happening. But to do that, I had to make a film about musicians, and I made a film called "The Life and Hard Times of Guy Terrifico,"
Mhm.
about the kind of the outlaw country music, 70s country music in the 1970s. And it was a scripted thing and created a fictional Canadian country singer and injected them into the world of those incredible poets like Chris Christopherson and Levon Helm and Willie Nelson and Bob Dylan and all those, and was fortunate enough to end up working with a bunch of those people as them playing themselves. It was a mockumentary,
Mhm.
and so that was my first film. I was in journalism school, and I think I just I had an image of what I wanted an interview to be with some of these great musicians based on all of the great documentaries that I had seen and all the great interviews I'd read, and could never quite get it right in real life, and so made it up a bit, and so went from that, and then and then wrote and directed that, and yeah, we I worked with a musician in Canada called Matt Murphy, who is just an extraordinarily gifted musician, and so created a couple albums based, that this fictional character had done, and then also did a six-part series called The Yard, which was another mockumentary set in a schoolyard with young kids that was looking at social issues and political issues, and it was kind of satire. And directed a feature film in between. But my love of documentaries and of music was just something that was always there, and eventually started making did a few short films on music, and we did a short film with Yo-Yo Ma, which was incredible. Yo-Yo Ma working with young children in the Sistema Orchestra, and I've just kind of always been fascinated with how we interact with music, how music interacts with us, and what it is within certain musicians that has that power to connect with people, and then that music connecting all of us together. And so it'd been mostly in kind of the scripted world, and then dipping my toe in documentary, and then came across Jackie Shane's album about 12 years ago, and was just so blown away by this. And like you at that time, I'd not heard of them either. So it felt like at once something much bigger and far beyond anything I've ever done. And it also felt like a lot of paths were coming together to make me want to make this film.
Mhm. I did want to ask you about Life and Hard Times of Guy Terrifico because I've seen some clips of it. I haven't had a chance to sit down and watch the whole movie yet because my movie is at home and I am sick at my mom's place as we are recording this interview. I'm pretty sure I do have a copy of it sitting on my shelf at home in my to watch pile. But that movie, looking at the trailer and looking at various clips online that I've been able to find, looks so fun and so like it just really like a good time was had by all, and everything. How'd you get some of the people like Chris Christopherson to, to be a part of this documentary? Like, and what were the connections there that got made?
I mean, there was luck and a lot of hard work, and I sent a lot of scripts accompanied with bottles of beer or cigars or
Mhm.
other contraband all over the world to all of these people that I just admired so much. But I also would do kind of I would basically rewrite the script every time before I sent it out to somebody to include them. And the fictional character of Guy Terrifico was kind of an amalgamation of a lot of these people's lives. And so what I was sending these people, I think they were kind of blown away to see themselves, their real selves, in the script, interacting with the fictional guy. But I think it was also very clear that it was a love letter to what they had done
Mhm.
and to the integrity that they all had and the risks that they took. And those guys were poets and they were brave poets and they spoke their mind and incredible integrity. And I think part of it was I was fascinated by the toll that this took on them. Like a poet, somebody who's that introverted, looking at themselves, looking at the connections, and really putting themselves out there, isn't necessarily the right, doesn't have the skill sets naturally necessarily to get on stage in front of a bunch of people and
Mhm.
deal with the demands of that. And I was sort of fascinated by that. And the fictional character he got a bit overwhelmed by this and in fact like Jackie in some ways disappeared for a long time because he could not handle some of that aspect of it. But there was a very serious aspect to it in some ways. But it was also like such great fun. And all of those, we worked with Merle Haggard, we worked with Ronnie Hawkins, we worked with Levon Helm. Um, these guys were outlaws. And I think starting out that film, I think I thought they were outlaws because of maybe some of their lifestyle. But they were outlaws because they were breaking rules of Music Row and they were, writing these intimate, sensitive songs. Um, and but they were also truly deeply kind people, So working with them was fun. Their generosity was extraordinary. And yeah, it was a dream come true for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're saying about having to respect the subject, especially in a mockumentary, is what makes the mockumentary good. Uh, A Mighty Wind, for example, I think is a great music documentary. It's clear that every one of the people that was involved in that one appreciated the folk era of the 1960s, and it very much seems like Guy Terrifico is going to be that, but with the actual musicians as
Yeah.
opposed to comedians playing the
Yeah.
musicians, which is something again I really appreciate. Now in the yard, the other film you mentioned, you were working with a lot of like kid actors. How did that play off of just you go from working with Chris Christopherson to Ronnie Hawkins to working with kid actors, basically in the same format, different story, but the similar format.
Well, I mean, Christopherson was a great actor in a
Yeah,
lot
he
of ways.
was.
He was an extraordinary actor, but not because he was trained. He listened, he was present, he was empathetic. Um, and so there was. And also I was just fascinated, by all of these guys. And so I let them talk. I let them do whatever they wanted to do in some ways, within some reason. And casting the yard, um, it, it was almost like if you looked at children age 6 to 10 that had a lot of experience on set, they weren't always the best actors. And so casting was looking, it was such a joy. I mean, we looked at 500 different kids on two con or in Canada and in the US to find these guys. But what it was looking for kids that were smart and engaged and interested. And, a lot of the auditions weren't sort of read these lines. It was like, hey, how's it going? How's school? And so to then on set, you're working with these really smart, charming, funny, odd, beautiful, beautiful little kids. And so it wasn't that dissimilar. Both were working with non-traditionally trained actors. And as a director and a writer, they were bringing something. Sometimes when you're working with a trained actor on a more traditional situation, they're doing what is in the script and they're doing what you ask of them. Working with non-traditional actors, they're bringing something that you could never dream of, that you would never ever think of. And so it was a great joy. It was chaotic. You're on set with little kids that are excited to be on set, and the amount of costumes that were spilled on, like it was beautiful insanity. But there was, you having there was just such joy and fun, and these kids were adorable. And to have that like on set, there was no egos, there was no, it just created such a good vibe. So yeah, it was great. And then it was also a project where we could look at what was going on in the world and read the newspapers, and instead of just getting angry, find a filter, find an outlet for this, and have little kids act out what adults were doing, and through that prism kind of say like,
Right.
what's going on? And so and it felt like the lunatics had taken over the asylum, definitely. So it was another, I felt very lucky to that somebody came on board and financed that and broadcast it. It was great.
Now you've gone from making two of your biggest works being mockumentaries to now a really good documentary. What are like the similarities and differences of working on a mockumentary versus a documentary?
Well,
Uh,
a bit,
how do
a
you
bit
approach it?
like you said about A Mighty Wind and Guy Terrifico, like these these were straight-faced documentary. Like you could tell that the people behind these things loved documentaries and loved the content that they were talking about. And so, for for Jackie, I mean, there was a couple things. One, I spoke with Jackie for over 100 hours in what would end up being the last year of her life. And a lot of those conversations, Jackie was obsessed with film. She had an encyclopedic knowledge of film. And so it was her talking about, she would tell me about certain films. And if I hadn't seen them, I would have to track them down. I'd watch them, send them to her. She'd rewatch them, and then we'd have a discussion. And so, she taught me so much, and these films taught me so much. So I had that as a foundation. And then, like making a mockumentary, there was a lot of references that we had for Jackie, that we could rely on. And as you know, Jackie didn't perform live on film, except for
Mhm.
one beautiful, beautiful performance on Night Train. And yet there was an incredible amount of live audio. So what we did was recreate those live performances, working with actors on green screen, basically lip syncing Jackie, and then painting over that.
Yeah.
And to do that, what I got to do, and I got to work with incredible directors of animation, was to go through our favorite documentaries and say music docs and say, can we get this look like of Otis Redding at Newport at night with the silhouette and the spotlights and all of those incredible Rolling Thunder? I just saw the Dylan film last night, and I was reminded of how much we borrowed, stole, paid homage to from Rolling Thunder, and so we got to. The approach was, we were standing on the shoulders of giants and got to look back at all these great films and say, can we shoot it like that? Can we get the color palette like that? Um, and we had a massive archive because of what Jackie left behind. Um, but really, it didn't seem, in terms of the storytelling, that incredibly different. I mean, Jackie, we were very, very true to Jackie's story and Jackie's voice and what Jackie wanted us to do. But sitting in the editing suite, it felt very, very similar in some ways to narrative. We knew what Jackie wanted to say, but the approach to that was very similar to narrative filmmaking, I think. And those things that will work when you're in pre-production and development, and you've had the greatest idea you've ever had, and this is going to be brilliant, and then you sit in the edit suite and you're like, that doesn't work at all. That's a bad idea, and you have to find a different way to do it. And I think Robert Altman said something like, production is just collecting a bunch of stuff, and with Jackie, because of what she left us, we had 25 hours of my recordings with her. She left us over 1,000 photos, and ephemera and everything. So what the story was, as told to us by Jackie, never changed, but the approach to it was like a beautiful puzzle. So it felt kind of similar.
You brought up many points that I want to bring up in a couple other questions and dive a little more deep into detail. But one of the things that you mentioned that I thought was interesting was that Jackie would talk about movies with you. What were some of the movies that Jackie Shane was bringing to the table?
She was I get she kept a journal of all the films that she watched when she was a recluse, and it was into the well over 3,000 that she would at the very least it would be the name, the date, and whatever, and often it would be like a two-page review collage, just a work of art that she did. So she knew her stuff backwards and forwards. Um, she loved Equus, the
Mhm.
Richard Burton movie, which
Yeah.
is, and so having somebody like Jackie walk you through that, that is a challenging movie, an extraordinary movie. But watching that movie and then talking through it with Jackie, for instance, that was empathy. That was like a father-son story, like people you could look at Equus. There's many, many parts to Equus, but she was focused on how this father treated the son, this boy, and
Mhm.
um, a woman called Moses was another one. Um, Black Like Me was a big
Mhm.
one for her. She loved gangster films and like old beautiful black and white gangster films.
Yeah.
And then her her journals, she continued watching gangster films forever. Sunset Boulevard, of course,
Mhm.
like those films. So yeah, it was her mind and her knowledge was really, really vast. And she hated Star Wars. Oh, but I, one of the points of the great, great education that she gave me was these were all films that you could watch over and over again. It wasn't this happened, that happened, that happened. It was films that made you think and made you question. And afterwards, you'd sit down and ask these things. And so, yeah, it was. it was extraordinary.
Mhm.
Um, and it was an extraordinary guide to how to tell her story, and one that we use not only just for her life story, but you know, a lot of people had knew exactly why Jackie Shane disappeared, and they could say it was this. And it wasn't that clear. Life is not that simple, and Jackie's life certainly wasn't that simple. And so to have the education from Jackie to be like, it's not paint by numbers, and people should be around sitting around the water cooler talking about this, and it was it this or was it that. It really helped to tell her complex story, but it also just generally as an artist really expanded my outlook, and things aren't, you don't have to tie things up in a neat bow, you know? So
Mhm.
yeah, she had opinions, man,
Yeah.
about film.
It seems like it, yeah. With Equus, being the father-son relationship, I bet you had opinions on that, given what's revealed about the stepfather, without
Yeah,
spoiling anything about the movie
yeah.
later on in the film, because it's a movie I don't want to spoil too much. I want people to go out there and actually see because, man, is it a powerful film. So you mentioned you had found a Jackie Shane album, and that's kind of what brought you to the project, but like how did it develop? From you getting, listening to an album to you talking with Jackie Shane and starting to put all this together.
Well, I mean, just first and foremost, listening to that album almost out of context. The context was I hadn't heard of her before, which was sort of shocking. But listening to that album, the virtuosity, the soul, the joy, the connection, the intimacy was a incredible experience. Hearing it for the first time, and then that's never dissipated for me. That feeling. But at that time, 12 years ago, I'd never heard of her, didn't know this kind of music was being made in my hometown of Toronto at that time. And so did a little digging to find out who this incredible artist was. And there was very little known, because of what she left behind. We knew that she had a number 2 hit. She said it would have gone to number 1, but the record station wouldn't let it, which I believe. So she had hits, and she left an incredible. It was Jackie Shane Live that I heard, and left this album. So it was clear that she was a big star in Toronto at any rate at that time. And there was very, very, very little known about her. And aside from that, she disappeared. And we didn't even know if she was alive or dead. Nobody knew. She disappeared in 1971. And when I first started looking 12 years ago, nobody knew if she was alive or dead. So I think the idea that how could this person be here on these streets, filling these clubs, recording this music, and that history had been all but erased, I think was a a bigger inspiration. And it's probably not a huge mystery of why that happened, but like, how could that happen? Why could that, how could we let that happen? So that was a big driving force, and to try to get to the bottom of this. And so I spent about a year um, trying to get through to her. It was announced that there was a reissue of her albums coming out with her consent. So we knew that she was alive in 2017. And so I spent about a year. She had two wonderful gentlemen, Rob Bowman, who's in our film, and another gentleman in England, who were sort of her gatekeepers that she trusted implicitly and loved. And so I spent about a year talking with those guys, and they would pass on messages to Jackie. And after about a year, they said she's ready to talk to you, and they gave me her number. And I remember thinking the first time I called her, if I can just make my pitch and say what her music means to me and my city and my community, then maybe she'll agree to this. And the first call, she let me talk for about 3 or 4 minutes, and I made my pitch. I think I did it pretty well. And then she started talking and spoke for 4 hours.
Mhm.
And at the end of that call, I had no idea if she would make this film, wanted to make this film.
Sure.
But I asked if I could call her back, and she said, yeah. And I called her back the next week, and every week after that for over a year. And, those conversations, that time with Jackie, it was the most incredible experience of my life. And she we talked on average 4 or 5 hours. She spoke once for 11 hours straight, which was incredible. And
That's a day you'll never forget, I bet.
oh my, I was starving. I had a young kid at the time. I have these notes from to my young daughter saying, are you hungry? Are you starving?" And she'd say no. And I will never forget that day. I'll never forget that year. I still hear Jackie's voice, and I think about her every day. And but within that, so there was the education of the art education that she gave me. That was extraordinary. But it was also Jackie. There was so much to her life that, as a huge movie fan and aficionado, I think she was truly working through how can we tell a story? This story is so big with so much stuff in it. How can we tell this in a feature-length documentary? Was something I think we were working through together. And then she was a very, very, very private person, and somebody who was in control of her image no matter what. Like she didn't let anybody tell her what to do or enforce that. And so um, it was also, uh, um, she would walk me through her life in a very thoughtful, methodical way of saying, here's this, like it was like a curriculum, like that she was walking you through, you must understand this, but then also it was a test to see how you reacted. And after about 6 months, she would start apologizing for having not made a decision yet, and she just didn't know. And she, in a giggling way, sort of said, when she agreed to do the film, she admitted that it was also an endurance test, like that films take so long. And so she was like, is this guy going to keep coming back and keep listening? Um, and so yeah, it was a year with Jackie, and she was nominated for a Grammy. And it was about a month or so after the Grammys, and after she had said, "Let's do it and let's make this film," that Jackie then passed away. So, which was heartbreaking personally. And then, how do you make a film without your hero? But luckily, about 6 months into it, we were having a conversation one week, and she was telling me about her friend Jim the Junkie, and kind of these funny stories and sad stories about this musician who was a dear friend of hers, and who was a drug addict, and she just called him Jim the Junkie. And I'd be scribbling. I didn't want to ask her if I could record our interviews because I didn't want to, out
Right.
of respect and whatnot. And after talking about Jim the Junkie, I'd go through my notes and try to connect dots and make sense of it. And the next week I called her and I said, "Jackie, is Jim the Junkie Jimi Hendrix?" And she said, "Yeah, yeah, he played guitar." I know he played guitar. And so at that point, I was like, listen, I used that as a moment to say, can I please record this? Because there's just, what if I'm missing some of these pieces? Because so when she passed away, I honestly didn't know if I could make this film or not without her, as we were going to do this together, and without her as the guide, as my partner in this. But luckily, we had 25 hours of her voice, and my relationship with her and my understanding and respect for what she wanted this film to look like. So it was pretty clear that we could do that and have her tell her story with her voice using these recordings.